Good morning. I'm Pastor Clark Kelsey, and welcome to the 9th in the Chicken Room Sermon Series. If you have your Bibles, please open to Psalm 142. Of all the people in the Bible, one of the very first ones that most people learn about is David, right? We learn about the day Samuel the prophet comes to the home of a shepherd boy in a tiny village and anoints David to reign as the future king of Israel. And shortly afterward, David finds himself in battle against Goliath and defeats him. And from there, he is promoted to captain of the armies of Israel and leads them to victory after victory. It was great heights. But then came great lows. King Saul despises David because of his popularity and orders the very soldiers under David's command to take him prisoner. So David runs for his life as the king pursues him. But no place in his own country is safe, and so he leaves Israel and goes to the Philistine cities, the enemy nation who David and his soldiers have been fighting against. But that is how desperate David was. And not surprisingly, the Philistines did not accept him either. So where does David go? He flees to the desert in the south of Israel, where he finds a cave and hides. So picture this. David, the anointed future king of Israel, once the captain of Israel's armies, now running for his life from his enemies and his own countrymen, hiding in a cave as the armies of Israel hunt him down, and wondering, what about my being king? What about returning to my country? How can I possibly outrun the armies of Israel? How would you be feeling if you were David alone in that cave? Discouraged? Discouragement comes when we face a bad situation that we can't control, we can't change. We want to get well, but in spite of all we do, our health remains poor. We need a job. We want to get married. We want to have a baby. And everything we try ends up failing. That leads to discouragement. We want to be rid of living under this coronavirus, not having to fear infection, wanting to get back to our normal lives, being rid of the government orders that are all around us. And yet there's so much we can't control. So much that is beyond our ability to change and has many people discouraged. And more discouraged as the weeks stretch out longer and longer. Look, our God loves us, and he sends us help to handle our times of discouragement. Before us is Psalm 142. And look at the words just before verse 1. It says, Psalm 142, a maskil of David when he was in the cave. While David sat in that cave hiding from Saul, he wrote a song called a maskil. What is that? The word means instruction. A maskil was different from other psalms in that it was written to instruct people about something. How did most of us learn the alphabet? From the ABC song, right? That song is not written for enjoyment, but for teaching. Psalm 142 is a song written for teaching. Teaching what? Teaching instructions for escaping discouragement. Look at how David describes his discouragement at the beginning of verse 7. He says, bring my soul out of prison. What is it that David seeks? Freedom from the prison of discouragement. That is what discouragement can be, a prison that traps us inside so we can't move forward. Can you think of something in your life that has you discouraged? I'm sure we all can. We all face situations we can't control and can't change and can leave us discouraged. How are you handling your discouragement? Many people give up in despair and stop moving forward. But God has David write us a song to instruct us on how to keep moving forward when discouragement hits. That is what we're looking at this morning. How to keep moving forward when discouraged. In this message, we will learn 4 ways that God says we can escape being imprisoned by discouragement. So this morning, if you need encouragement, if something has you discouraged, let's look at what God has to say. Let's listen to David's song, where he writes about how to keep moving forward in discouragement. Let's read this song together, and I'll be reading from the New American Standard Version. Psalm 142, 1 through 7. I cry aloud with my voice to the Lord. I make supplication with my voice to the Lord. I pour out my complaint before him. I declare my trouble before him. When my spirit was overwhelmed within me, you knew my path. In the way where I walk, they have hidden a trap for me. Look to the right and see, for there's no one who regards me. There is no escape for me. No one cares for my soul. I cried out to you, O Lord. I said, you are my refuge, my portion in the land of the living. Give heed to my cry, for I am brought very low. Deliver me from my persecutors, for they are too strong for me. Bring my soul out of prison, so that I may give thanks to your name. The righteous will surround me, for you will deal bountifully with me. Okay, here's David feeling discouraged as he sits alone in a desert cave. And what is the first thing he says? Number one, he says, I cry aloud with my voice to the Lord. I make supplication with my voice to the Lord. I pour out my complaint before him. I declare my trouble before him. Now notice David first says that he cries aloud to the Lord. That word literally means to holler, to shout out with a loud voice. It's not a mild word. And then he expresses that same feeling in verse 2. He says he poured out his complaint to the Lord. That's a strong word too. Picture yourself with a large tub of water and you pour all that water out onto the ground. David is starting by loudly crying out to God and pouring out all his emotions to him. And that is God's first instruction for escaping the prison of discouragement. Level with God about your feelings. Level with God about your feelings. You know what many people do when they get sad and discouraged? They bottle up their feelings. They feel so sad that they stop moving forward. They head to the refrigerator. They head to drinking alcohol. They head for the mall. Some people don't head to anywhere at all but just sit there in their misery. Bottling up your emotions is not staying on God's path for you. It isn't moving forward. And it tends to trap you in a prison. Instead, what does God instruct us to do through this song? Keep moving forward by leveling with God about your feelings. Don't hold back, but let your emotions flow out before God. You might say, well, yeah, Pastor, but the things that I'm feeling aren't things that I should be saying to God. Yes, we can have some pretty ugly feelings when we're discouraged. But wait a minute, doesn't God already know the way we feel? Yeah. And isn't God able to handle those feelings? Yes. So you might as well be honest with him about them and let them out, even feelings that are wrong. Listen to how David talks about an enemy that was hurting him in Psalm 109. It says, let his years be few. Let his position be given to someone else. May his children become fatherless, and may his wife become a widow. May his children wander as beggars. May they be evicted from their ruined homes. May creditors seize his entire estate and strangers take all that he has earned. Let no one be kind to him. Let no one pity his fatherless children. May all his offspring die. Is David right to want these things? No, that is not the way Jesus says that we're supposed to handle our enemies. But right or wrong, David is right in talking to God about his feelings. Yes, right or wrong, he's right to talk about his feelings to God. These were David's feelings, warts and all. And again, didn't God already know that David felt this way? Yeah. And wasn't God able to handle those feelings? Yes. So instead of stuffing them inside, David lets them out and pours them out at God's feet. And our verse is David's in the cave. He says that he feels overwhelmed because a trap is set for him. He says he has no one, he has no escape, and no one cares. David is feeling extremely unsafe and all alone. But instead of bottling up his feelings, he honestly opens up and lets God know about them. Here's God's first instructions to keep us from being imprisoned by discouragement. Let me ask you, what are your feelings today about your discouraging situation? God instructs you to open up to him about it, even if those feelings are wrong. Take your feelings and talk them out, write them out, shout them out, cry and sob them out before God. He already knows them, and he still loves you. He is still your closest friend. Not only if you have the right reactions, but even when you have the wrong reactions. He is the wonderful counselor. So go to him and hold nothing back. Pour it all out and be honest with him. These are God's first instructions for how to keep moving forward when discouraged. God's second instructions are found in verse 5. I cried out to you, O Lord. I said, you are my refuge, my portion in the land of the living. Now get this. In verse 4, David has said that he sees no safety for him, that there's no one around for him. But then in verse 5, he rouses himself and says to God, God, you are my refuge. What is a refuge? It's a safe place, like a castle. David grew up being taught that God is our safe place in times of trouble. But sitting there in that cave, he didn't feel that way at all. He did not feel safe. And he levels with God in verse 4 about how he doesn't feel safe. But then immediately in verse 5, he makes a choice. That he's not going to live by his feelings, but he's going to live by God's promises. His feelings say no, he's not safe. But God's promises said that he was safe. So after pouring out all his feelings that he doesn't feel safe, he claims God's promises that he is safe. And that is the second instruction for moving forward in discouragement. Claim God's promises. I've told the story before about the time our family visited the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. We all traveled to the city, got on the tour bus. It was jam-packed with crowds of people, not only on the bus, but all over the city. It was a hot summer day. We got off the bus and walked to the stairs at the bottom of the Lincoln Memorial. My mother offered to stay at the bottom there with a baby stroller while the rest of the family made the trip to the top. We had in the baby stroller all our jackets and water bottles and things. And one of the things was Carlene's cross-stitch bag, which had a hand-stitched Christmas stocking she had been working on for years and was almost done. So my mom stayed with the stroller at the bottom of the steps while the rest of us walked to the top, and we were up there and saw everything there, and then came back down, picked up the stroller, and everybody got on the bus in order to go to the next site. And about halfway across town, I heard, "Where's my cross-stitch bag?" And I realized, oh no, the cross-stitch bag must have fallen out. And there's Carlene ripping through the stroller looking for the cross-stitch bag, and it's nowhere there. It must have fallen out. Carlene was in full panic mode. So when the bus stopped for more passengers, my brother and I leapt off of the bus and ran back to the Lincoln Memorial, dodging all the traffic and buses and people everywhere. And it took us about 10 minutes. But as we approached the crowded Lincoln Memorial bus stop, I'm looking all over the ground trying to find it, and I don't see it anywhere. People everywhere, people shoving, pushing, and then I see in the gutter, there it is. Her bag lying on its side, everything still in it, untouched, people walking over it. And what do you think I did next? I snatched that up because it was mine. You know what's in the Bible? Hundreds of promises that are mine, and yours too. And what does God tell us to do when we're discouraged? To go back and look for those promises, and when you find them, snatch them up as yours. You know, living by feelings is moving off God's path for your life. God says we walk by faith, not by sight, not by how we feel. Walking by faith means walking by promises, God's promises. Has a cruel person been mistreating you? And everything you tried, nothing's fixed it? It will feel like they're getting away with it. But God has promises for us. 2 Corinthians 5:10. We must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that each one may receive what is due to him for the things done in the body, whether good or bad. This means God promises to right all the wrongs that other people have done to you. Does it feel like your present circumstances are only going to end up being terrible? We know Romans 8:28, God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God. Does it feel like you're so stressed that you're going to crack? 1 Corinthians 10:13, God is faithful and will provide the way of escape so that you will be able to endure it. These are all God's promises for you to find and snatch up for your own. And that is what David did as he sat there in that lonely cave. What did he feel? He felt that he was alone and unsafe and no one cared for him. But he chose instead to walk by promise, that he was safe and he was with Almighty God. God's instructions here are to keep moving forward in discouragement by, number one, level with God about how you feel. But then number two, Don't live by those feelings. Instead, walk by God's promises and claim them for yourself. Walk by God's promises. God's third instruction to escape discouragement is found in verses 6 and 7. Give heed to my cry, for I am brought very low. Deliver me from my persecutors, for they are too strong for me. Bring my soul out of prison. Notice David's three requests here. Give heed, deliver me, bring my soul out of prison. What are these requests? They are cries to God for help. And that is God's third instruction, to keep moving forward by crying for God's help. Cry for God's help. David cries for God to give heed to him. But doesn't God give heed to everyone and everything that's in the world? Yes. But David's feelings were saying God didn't heed him. So he cries out to God for help. God, give me heed, because it doesn't feel like you're heeding me. God, deliver me, because it doesn't feel like you're delivering me. Bring my soul out of prison, because it doesn't feel like I'm going to escape this. You know, the worst thing about discouragement is its power to make us turn aside and give up. Take a strong, motivated person and discourage them, and they can turn into a weak, unmotivated person who just sits there. David felt like he was in prison, but he overcame the terrible power of discouragement by crying out for the greater power of God. Do you see no hope for your situation changing? God has unlimited power for you. Do you see no hope of escape? God owns all the escape plans in the world. Do you have no friends? He's the friend that sticks closer than a brother. Do you see no future for yourself? He has all your future planned out and the power to bring you into a bright and glorious place. But you can't just give up. This is possibly the hardest thing about discouragement. When you're unmotivated and feel like giving up, but instead you rouse yourself to cry out for God's help and keep moving forward. This morning, are you crying out to God for help? Don't give in to giving up. God says to rouse yourself and cry out to him for help. Cry out saying, look, hear me, deliver me, bring me out of my prison. If you're not doing that, do it. If you are doing that, keep it up. Don't stop. Cry out again and again as long as you're discouraged. What if God doesn't answer your cries for help? David cried out to God in that cave, but then went 7 more years, continuing to run for his life from cave to cave and town to town. And you too can follow these steps perfectly and see no immediate change. Is it all just empty words then? Or will God really deliver you? That is the question God wants you to answer. Often, he doesn't answer our requests right away to see what we will do. Will we shake our fists at him and say, even you have abandoned me? Or will we say, no, in your timing, you will make all things right. You have promised it. God's third instruction to keep moving forward in discouragement is to cry out to him for help. Make sure you're doing that. God's fourth instruction is found at the end of verse 7. The righteous will surround me, and you will deal bountifully with me. What do we learn from this? David says the righteous will surround him. The Lord will deal bountifully with him. But did he see righteous people coming to join him? Not at the moment. Did he experience God's bountiful dealing with him at the time? No, he did not. What David could see was that he was still sitting alone in a dark cave. So how did David come to say this? David here was not just claiming God's promises as he had in step 2. He was choosing to project God's promises onto what would happen to him next. You know how our computer projector at church takes our praise songs and projects them up onto the screen for all of us to sing from. David here took God's promises and projected them onto his future. And that is God's fourth instruction for times of discouragement. Project your faith onto your future. Project your faith onto your future. David says, righteous people will surround me. God will deal bountifully. Listen, nothing had changed in David's life. What had changed was David. He is honest about his feelings to God, but instead of focusing on his feelings, he focuses on claiming God's promises. And he doesn't stop simply with that. He then projects God's promises onto what his future is going to be like now. I'm going to be surrounded by righteous people. God's going to deal bountifully with me because he has promised that. This is such an important step for escaping discouragement. Picturing what your future is going to be like. It's one thing to claim God's promises. Romans 8:28, God works all things together for good. But it is going a step further that projects it onto your future. Look, God's going to use these specific wrongs being done to me by this person at work to perfect my life. God's going to use my present joblessness to show me his great provision. God will use my frustrations with this very difficult person to make my life better. That's projecting God's promises into what your future is going to be like because of them. And what effect will that have? It can soothe your soul. Now you have to be careful to not overstate how God's promises might apply to your life. You can't say, well, because of Romans 8:28, God's going to give me $1 million. I'm never going to get sick again. But you can state future outcomes that harmonize with what God has already told us. Like, God will provide all my needs for my present situation of joblessness. God will give me wisdom to make the best possible decisions with this very difficult person. And that can soothe our troubled souls. What it means is you don't have to wait for soothing or peace until the answer comes. You could have the bad situation and still have peace because you project it onto your future. No, you don't see those changes happening, but you can experience the peace from them by picturing them happening to you right now. What promises of God do you need in your discouraging situation right now? I will lead you in the way you should go. I will generously and gladly give you wisdom. I will provide your needs. I will give you victory in your hardship. Take the promise of God that you need and now picture what your future will be like because of those promises. That God will lead me to wisdom to find a new job. That God will provide me with victory through the struggles I am facing with this very difficult person. That God will improve our lives through all these struggles with the coronavirus and the outcomes. How? We don't know how. But we know that God is unable to break his promises, and he is how these promises will get done. Here then is David's song, a song where God instructs us in how to escape the prison of discouragement and move forward. And what actually happened in David's life after he prayed this prayer? Righteous people did surround him quickly, as loyal men and soldiers sought him out in the desert and went to go live with him in those caves. And God did deal bountifully with David by providing all of his needs and eventually leading him to ascend the throne of Israel and reign as one of the greatest kings that has ever lived. But none of that seemed possible as he sat there alone in that dark cave. Can I show you the map of your life? If you have received Christ as your complete hope of forgiveness and peace with God the Father, then like David, your future is leading you to reigning with Jesus. When Jesus returns to sit on the throne of this world, all the saints who stand with him now will rule the earth along with him forever and ever. How are you and I possibly qualified to do that? God is training us right now, just as he trained David the shepherd boy to be able to be a king who sat on the throne of Israel. God's training for David included the faith challenge with Goliath, and then leadership responsibilities of being a captain of Israel's armies, and then responding to the faith challenge of being despised and pursued by King Saul, and then being alone in a cave, and then later leading men who joined him in the desert. And all those experiences were dropped onto the map of David's life to train him for his future role as reigning as king, and it worked. Because of all those experiences, David developed the character and skills that qualified him to step into reigning as Israel's king. And the same will be true for you and me if we keep moving forward in times of discouragement. God has dropped onto the map of our lives the faith challenges we each need to train us for our future in reigning with Jesus. None of the hardships of your life have happened by accident. They all entered by God's permission and included God's intention that they train you to become the future ruler God has destined you to be. And the question is, will you respond the right way? Will you stay on his path when the training gets hard and discouraging? Or will you leave God's path, hinder your training, and bring God's discipline upon your life until you decide to get back on his path and obey again? If you're discouraged about something in your life today, then you're facing a faith challenge where God is seeking to train you for your future reigning with Christ. And today, he has instructed you on how to escape turning off his path and keep moving forward in discouragement. Which of his instructions did you need to hear today? Think of something that has you discouraged. Now, do you need to, number one, level with God about your feelings? Are you honestly pouring out your feelings to God, even the ones that aren't right? Number two, do you need to claim God's promises? Have you found and snatched up his promises that belong to you and claimed them for yourself? Number three, have you cried out for God's help? Or have you allowed yourself to give up crying out because you're just so discouraged? Don't do that. And have you projected your faith onto your future? Have you stated out loud the way God will keep his promises for you? Do that. There is far too much discouragement that swirls around our lives every day. God knows we can be sucked down and imprisoned by it. And there's no guaranteed way that we can escape discouraging feelings, but there is a way to struggle against them and keep moving forward when they come. As you face discouragement in life, struggle against it. Struggle and level with God about your feelings. Struggle and claim God's promises. Struggle and cry out for God's help. Struggle and project your faith onto your future. It will be hard to do this, but God knows that the struggle of doing the hard thing is exactly what it takes to make us better people. People ready to reign the world with Jesus one day. Well, thank you for joining me this morning. I trust that God has blessed you through his living word to keep going when it's getting discouraging. May God bless you and give you a very good day. Thank you.